always is with Barbara. Sanbonani Dumelang, good evening and welcome to episode 248 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamantungwa Kumalo. It's the Wednesday edition of the Private Property Podcast. I know for many of us it's Fake Monday as we enjoyed a great public holiday yesterday. I do hope that you had time to rest and spend some time with perhaps friends or family, of course, in a very safe manner. Well, we're back on your screens this evening as we always are every single weekday at 7 p.m. I'm always in conversation with an expert who helps us navigate our property journey. And it doesn't matter whether you are a seller, you're a buyer, you're a tenant, you're a landlord, or you're looking to build. This is the property show that you want to make sure you are always tuned into. The only daily property show in South Africa that helps you in all your property needs. And this evening, we're going to be tackling something that I know a lot of us tend to think about, or certainly need to be thinking about, because, of course, it's something that I know, and I've admitted this before, I tend to be, very anxious about it. And that is, of course, retirement. But before I get into what you can expect on the show this evening, of course, you can also expect other great shows across our social media platforms here on Private Property. So do start off by making sure that you follow us across our social media platforms, talking Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, as well as our YouTube channel. You can find us across those social media platforms, as well as on TikTok, where you find great content that Esty Clausen brings to your screens. And talking of Esty Clausen, you can catch the First Time Home Buyers show later this evening at 8 p.m. with Esty, where she's always in conversation with somebody who has walked that first-time home buying journey and has gone on to do great things with their property portfolio. And of course, you can also catch award-winning farmer Umbalino on the Farming Podcast that is on your screens every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 8 p.m. as well. And she's always in conversation with an expert within the agricultural sector. Doesn't matter whether it's finance side or the farmers themselves. They certainly do also help you have a better understanding of the agricultural landscape and help you make decisions around agriculture if you're a farmer yourself or are in the agri space, or perhaps exploring going into agriculture. And every Mondays and Fridays, Chad brings you the Home Shoppers Show. I'm sure that you've watched the show. Is always cruising around and gives you really great content that you can look forward to, profiling some great properties that you can find on our website. That's www.privateproperty.co.za. So do make sure that you go to our website, check out the great properties that we've got on offer, and of course go to our advice section where you can read up on all the great articles that we have on there. And of course, we are across the social media platforms. You can follow myself at Zamantungwa_K on Twitter as well as on Instagram. Now, for this evening, we're looking at property and retirement and how to leverage your property investments when you are retiring. Now, I know that a lot of us, younger millennials, because obviously as millennials, we are in different age groups, with the oldest millennium being around 39, 40, you tend to find that retirement is one of those things we typically do not want to really think about, even when it comes to, saving conventionally or investing conventionally for retirement. It's one of those things that we think, I'm going to have time for it when I'm older. And older people and a lot of course, financial advisors, financial planners will tell you, look, you want to start as early as possible. The earlier you start, the better, across different asset classes. And so this evening, we're going to be looking at the advantages of using property as an asset class when instead of other ways of investments, particularly for retirement. Also going to be looking at how to structure your property portfolio, and as particularly when it comes to the incomes of those specific specific properties, when it comes to optimizing things for your retirement. And lastly, we can, of course, then look at what you can potentially use your properties for. And I think one of the big things that I want to hear from, viewers at home, from you at home, is Have you started planning for retirement? And if you have, what have you already started doing now for retirement? It would be great if you can include your age, just so we get a sense of how old people are when they're already actively starting to, put in certain things in place for retirement purposes. As I said, this is one of those things that I tend to get overwhelmed by. I remember in my early 20s, thinking, oh God, now I must take out, a life cover and all kinds of insurance products for retirement purposes. And it was very angst-inducing and very overwhelming, because I just think it's one of those things that you don't quite get used to. And you really do think, listen, I've got time. I'm in my 20s. I'll see that in my 30s. You reach the 30s and you're like, I think I still have time. So I want to hear from you at home. Have you started planning for your retirement? If you have, what are some of the things that you are actively doing that are for retirement purposes? It doesn't have to be property related. If it is, do share it down here below. But we certainly want to find out what you are already doing when it comes to all things retirement. Well, our guest this evening to help us when it comes to retirement as far as property is concerned is Barbara Mundell, who's the founder of Your Money Life Coach. Barbara, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening. It's great to be back and having a chat to the viewers again.
It's always so great chatting to you, Barbara. And I think, let's get into it this evening. Retirement, angst-inducing, and I don't know if I'll ever get used to the idea of planning for, old age and planning for a time when we're not working. And I think perhaps even another shift with a lot of overachieving millennials, we always say, look, I want to retire before I'm 40. So the concept of even, planning for when you're 60 or 65 and, putting a little bit away, it's just such a foreign concept for so many of us. But of course, this evening we're looking at, property when it comes to your retirement and how to leverage off of it. I think a good starting point, Barbara, is why property? Because I think so many people will talk about the different kinds of products that are there, different kinds of asset classes. So what are some of the advantages of using property instead of other asset classes?
Zama, before I get into that question, I just want to echo that sentiment of starting too soon. Because when you're in your 20s, you're like, yes, I'm great, I've got this, I can do this. And then you reach 30 and you're like, I should have started then, but I'm not kind of in the right headspace now. And before you look, you're 40 and you go, how did I get here so quickly, so soon? So that, yes, the earlier you start, the better. And remember, you can utilize some of the other investment vehicles to get up to your property game, and you're using property for your investment portfolio. So there's lots of ways and means, but tonight we specifically want to focus on the retirement benefits and how we can utilize all of that. So I think the main key thing is, if you're thinking of investing in property for retirement, it has to be an income generating property. You can't look at my home as my retirement, because your home is, unfortunately for most people, yes, it's an asset, but it also comes with a big liability. And the older we get, the smaller places we want, because the maintenance on those properties are a lot less. So it has to be an income generating property. Now, it again also has to form part of a bigger portfolio that you've got. You can't only rely on property, because then we've got something like COVID that hits and your tenants can't pay their rent. And what do you do now? Your entire income can't be based just on your property. So I think that's very important to get that out of the way. There's a lot of advantages in using property rather than traditional structures, in that the fact that that property is liquid to a point. Because you can at any time decide, I want to sell this property now and rather invest in a new one. Yes, there'll be a bit of taxes and stuff you need to pay, but it's not tied up in your traditional income streaming, generating, providing assets that gives you that comfort to say, well, I'll get that every single month. You can do with it and manage it as you see fit. You might decide, listen, I'm up and leaving. Millennials, as we call them, is people of the world. So you might want to rather move to another country after retirement. And then you've got this property that you can sell and then use that capital to buy property in a foreign country to regenerate that income property. So that's the one part that I really think is the best advantage of using retirement as property as part of your retirement portfolio.
And, I think, Barbara, one of the other things perhaps is and you outlined it, is that it has to be an income generating property, which flows so nicely to then how do we go about structuring some of that income, and perhaps when you answer the question of how we structure that income, let's look at, I'll say the two scenarios of somebody who would have bought in their personal capacity and let's say build their property portfolio in their personal capacity versus somebody who was able to do it via another vehicle, for example the PTY, perhaps even a trust. But I think let's focus primarily on the PTY because more people would use that as opposed to a trust, and how you then go about sort of structuring that particular income.
So, Sama, if you use the property as part of your company portfolio and you've structured it in a property, remember you can either have the assets in the company or you can have a management company that manages the day-to-day operations where the income gets generated. So there's a couple of ways to use it. The biggest thing that you need to understand is the minute you bring in a company versus in your own personal capacity, there's a division of liability. So the property in the company takes it away from your personal assets in the sense that that company, remember, you can be a director, derive the income from it, but the shareholders can be totally different people, which also helps with the transition of your assets over time, especially when you're nearing retirement. So there's a great option for you to utilize that company without physical property transfers, as and when you do then get to the age where you decide, listen, this is majority of what needs to go where. Because we all, retirement and then subsequent death is sort of, it's the natural progression of life. So that makes it very easy from that point. Also, you can manage the tax efficiency of the structure because you've got an additional tax resource that you can use to generate and decide how you want to split your tax to make sure that you find that optimum balance of paying the tax in your retirement. And we all know that pensioners do get certain retirement advantages, but the beautiful thing is if you made use of the company, you can still make use of that as those advantages by paying yourself that income stream and have the advantages of the company on a separate thing.
I'm this evening in conversation with Barbara Mundell, who's the founder of Your Money Life Coach this evening, as we're looking at property and retirement, how to leverage your property investments when you retire. I want to find out from you at home, what are some of the things that you've already started doing for your retirement? And it doesn't have to be, only about property, but I'm certainly interested in how we are thinking through retirement, particularly because when you look at retirement, it's not going to only involve property as an asset class. You want to diversify your investments as much as possible, as opposed to only having, property as an asset class that you are invested in. So do share some of the things that you've already started putting in place for retirement purposes. And if possible, also just put in how old you are, just so we get a sense of which age group or relative age group is already, has things in place when it comes to making retirement decisions. And we've got a comment here coming through from Facebook, Rudy Mundell, saying, yes, as my wife is doing the finances and she is financially savvy. And as you can guess, this is obviously Barbara's husband and have retirement plans in place. That's very important. Start at a young age to save for retirement. And that's such an important thing, Barbara, that you were even echoing earlier. And I want to actually find out from you almost how we should look at retirement from like the difference when we are in our 20s, in our 30s, and in our 40s. Because as you're saying, I know in my 20s, it really wasn't that thing I took particularly seriously. Now in retrospect, I wish when I started working, I took it more seriously and I was very aggressive in, choosing retirement products to invest in, or even, when I started working, we didn't yet have a tax-free savings account. It started sort of being implemented soon after I started working. So there's a part of me that certainly does wish I started almost that same year I started working, because I think at this point, I would have made a little bit of inroads in as far as my retirement, plans are concerned. It's not too late, luckily. I mean, I'm 31, so there's still ways to kind of recover from making the mistakes that so many of us make in our 20s. But how should we look at, and what are some of the things in particular should we probably do and not do when it comes to retirement in our 20s versus 30s versus 40s?
Sama, I think the biggest thing that people often forget is the mind shift. You have to get that mind shift or that mindset right when you're in your 20s. And I always say to people, think about it this way. Do your bucket list as early as possible in your 20s. I mean, we all have things we want to do, places we want to see, things we really want to do. And then you'll start realizing how important it is to have money to do that. And then once you've gotten to that point where you realize that, listen, I want to do this, or I really want to retire by 40 like most of the other guys, you'll start prioritizing it in your mind. Because once you've set that ball in motion of these are things that I want to do one day, and I really can now start making concerted effort to getting towards achieving them, your mind just slightly changes and you're like, maybe I don't have that much time. So I always say to clients when I meet them the first time, especially my younger clients, is start with your bucket list, and we'll tackle your bucket list on your items that you really want to do. And you can literally see that mind shift change from, well, maybe I'm not too young to save for retirement, considering there's so many things I want to do in retirement. And it also triggers a thing like, right now I want to have a healthy life so that I don't save all this money for retirement, and then at retirement I'm too ill to do all these things. So it creates a very different mindset in that person once you've started doing your bucket list. That will then hopefully encourage you to say, well, rather than having it here and now, I want to make sure I can tick off these items on my bucket list, and then you can start saving. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a retirement vehicle. Like you say, tax-free savings is an ideal vehicle, or you can just use your normal unit trust investments, because what if you want to do some of those things before 40? Obviously, consider some advice with regards to the tax, because there is some more tax-efficient vehicles than others. But in essence, as long as you've got some exposure to shares, equity, property, those kind of things, that will help you get your money to work for you and help you to actually see that there's hope of achieving whatever you want to achieve on your bucket list.
But, Barbara, I want to push in slightly, especially for those, and maybe it's because I'm in my 30s, for those in their 30s who probably made a few financial mistakes in their 20s because, you didn't have the advice, you didn't really think about it, or as many of us think, look, I've got enough time, so I don't need to think about that. How should we be doing it differently in our 30s? Because I think, bucket list aside, we sometimes also just don't quite know where to start. Some people don't have the greatest bucket list, really. Or maybe it's just a bit everywhere, especially because I'm also now thinking we've just had a year and we continue to live in a global pandemic. Many of us, our bucket list involved something that had to do with travel, for example. Maybe you've already bought a property, you've got a house. So we know we can't really travel, and we're also just rethinking the concept of travel altogether. But retirement remains one of those things that we must, of course, plan for and do something in order to work towards. How should we almost approach getting serious about making inroads when it comes to our retirement plans in our 30s? Because I think that's where so many people realize, oh, snap, I actually made a lot of bad decisions in my 20s. Some people need to financially recover and all sorts of things. And at the same time, you want to be able to start building, because everybody's telling you start early, but you feel like I can't start because I still have to recover from, the hamors that I made in my 20s. So how do we then almost, reconcile that for ourselves?
So, Zama, I think there's two very key important factors there, and that is, one, get rid of your debt as soon as you can. Because your debt's your one thing that will weigh you down for as long as you continue that mistake, for lack of a better word, because you will always carry that debt with you. Credit card seems to be the biggest bugbear for most people. So get rid of that debt as soon as you can before you actually start planning for your retirement. Mm-hmm. The second thing is, make a concerted effort to try to cut down your expenses and decide what travel aside, what does retirement really look like for you? What do you see yourself doing? And I know it's a difficult thing at age 30, but when you can't decide is exactly when you say, well, maybe I want to go all out, full-blown party, full-blown the lifestyle. Then you need to start saving as much as you can, as quickly as you can.
Yeah.
If you're an entertainer by nature, you want to go entertainment parties, great. Start as much as early as you can. So the biggest thing is, I think, is just one, recover from that debt burden, because a lot of people carry this debt burden into their 40s, into their 50s, into their 60s. And the problem is now they need to retire, but they really want to get rid of this debt. And then they use half of what they saved for to pay off this debt. And then they're stuck with half of what they wanted to use. So get rid of that debt burden as quickly as possible. The second, well, the last piece of advice in all of that is make sure that you have some sort of concerted effort and knowing what exactly you are saving for every single month. If you've got some sort of goal, it doesn't really necessarily mean that you are going to achieve it or not achieve it, but have some sort of goal, because that just gives you that bit of motivation between the decisions of, oh, I want this pair of shoes, or I really want this new car, versus, well, maybe I actually want to achieve what I really intended for in the first place.
We are this evening taking your questions and comments as we talk all things retirement, especially when it comes to property. I'd asked you earlier, what have you already started, or what did you start doing as early as probably maybe your 20s when it comes to planning for your retirement? I want to hear from you at home, and it doesn't have to include property, because I know that we various people use different asset classes to invest in for investment purposes. We've got a comment here, well, a question actually from Facebook coming from Charlene Pillay saying, hi, I got a primary house. I bought my first rental property in my own name and paid it up. I now want to buy a second rental property. Should I buy it in my own name? Please advise on the tax implications. So they have a primary residence and then they have a first rental property. Both of them are paid up, both are in her personal name, and they're now looking at a second rental property, wants to find out, should it be in her personal capacity or perhaps use a different vehicle? And, what's the tax implications of both sides of the coin?
So this is going to depend on how long you're planning to keep your property. When it comes to property, that is the key deciding factor. So if you're buying to build it up and sell it and make a profit of it, then yeah, do it in your own name, because your capital gains tax in your personal capacity is the least amount of any of the tax structures. If you're planning to buy it and hold it for income indefinitely, you will definitely need to be able to put down a substantial deposit in order to secure finance, especially if it's a newly registered company, so that the banks will look and say, right, we agree that we can have this finance in the company. You might still have to sign surety, but your tax implications there are, if you're not planning on holding it for a long period of time, and there is a potential of a great big capital growth, then the capital gains tax will hurt you rather than getting the necessary rental income to build up that tax buffer for you.
And one thing I'll definitely add for Charlene is you want to have a sit down with a professional who take you through the different scenarios, because as Barbara's pointed out, it really does boil down to how long you want to keep the property, what you want to do with the property, because that will dictate what the potential tax implications are. So do reach out to a professional. Barbara herself, I know, does these services, so you can also reach out. We've got her contact details down here below, so that you're able to best get a sense of what the potential tax implications are, depending on which decision you end up making. Now, Barbara, talking about what people can do with their properties, take us through what they could potentially use the property for, because oftentimes people are building property portfolios, having different kinds of properties. And I know that the average sort of property investor also doesn't have a very big portfolio. So we're talking, ordinary men and women at home who probably have 2 or 3 investment properties. Perhaps at most it may reach 6. but the average sort of investor wouldn't have, more than 10, for example. So the moment you reach those kinds of numbers, you're in a slightly different league. And more often than not in the minority, because the reality is not many people are actually able to reach that level. And not many people want to also, because I think the more properties you add, you actually realize how much work it is. And you typically would have another job that you're doing full time, and you no longer want to add on more properties because you're thinking, look, this is going to be, more admin or whatever the case is, but you also don't want to offload what you currently have because you've put in the work and you want to be able to perhaps pass it on to your family when you pass away or whatever the case is. So then, Barbara, what can people at home use or potentially use their properties for?
So, Zama, you've got, so if we look at the depends where your property is located, but I've seen a lot of people having success of, instead of having a fixed tenant every single month, okay, obviously now with COVID, it's slightly different. However, after travel restrictions has been lifted, you've seen a spike in the increase of using of vacational or Airbnb properties. And the reason for that being is people now are so desperate to get out that, I mean, those kind of properties are fully booked weekend after weekend after weekend because people just need to get away. They just need to get out of this break after being for home so long. So those are two of the main purposes I'd suggest if it's based in a residential area, that you rather consider you can have a property with a sustainable monthly income every single month with your tenants. And then you can venture a bit into maybe have a letting it out for holiday purposes, because that it gives you greater return per day, because I mean people's obviously willing to pay more. You can also look at short-term rentals for those kind of properties, and the short-term rentals do have higher income streams purely because of the fact that it's a short-term thing that people are renting from you on a day-to-day basis. So those to me are the two ideal opportunities. When you start moving into commercial property, you have to remember that every single tenant has got their own unique requirements. So there might be a building and breaking, a lot of maintenance costs that you don't necessarily want to incur, especially when you're heading into retirement. So yeah, I'd consider in your property portfolio diversing into the two streams of your fixed residential, monthly coming in every single month, normal tenants, and then you've got your holiday home or your Airbnb, which gives you a nice return every single month with your ability to let it out for short-term rentals. And it's nice if you really want to go on holiday, you can book it and go on a holiday there yourself.
Barbara, as we begin to wrap up, I'm interested to find out how people who've already retired, and I know that we don't have as many viewers who have already retired. Never mind making the right decisions now, making sure you've structured things well for retirement purposes. When you're already retired, and let's say you've got a few properties, maybe some are paid out, maybe there's one that's got maybe a year or two left on the bond. What are creative ways you can leverage off or play around with those properties? Because I think I almost want to reverse it, right? So for those of us who are now younger, and I know sometimes the schlep and the admin of having a property and how you sometimes, have this big responsibility, sometimes your peers are doing all kinds of, nice things, and you have to think about, oh gosh, I now have, property responsibilities. I almost want us to have once you have retired and you're in retirement age, these are some of the perks, so to speak, or some of the things that you're then able to do when you have those properties that you're now sort of either have or are planning to acquire for investment purposes. So when you've already retired, perhaps you're 2 or 3 years into retirement, what are some things or creative things that you can do with the properties that you already have to essentially make your retirement more comfortable and obviously to maximize the returns that you can make while you're enjoying your retirement?
So I think the two key things is consider using some professionals to maintain that property on a regular basis for you, because that just put them on a monthly contract that they've got the responsibility. You're shifting that responsibility. Yes, you're giving away some of the income, but it's removing that headache from you for actually looking after the property. The other thing that we should never, ever, ever forget is when people retire, they often go into a bit of an emotional wobbly, as I put it, because they've had this full-time job for most of them 40 years that they've kept on doing the same thing every day, or like their career progressed. And now they retire and now there's nothing. They don't know what to do with themselves. So property is a nice way to keep you busy. You can look at the properties. You can look at enhancing the properties, maybe building on an additional flatlet. Projects like that you can really use, one, for your own sanity and something to keep you busy with and to give you a bit of purpose in life. And on the other hand, generate a possible new stream of income.
Well, Barbara, before we wrap up, any final tips for our viewers at home when it comes to property and retiring?
Biggest one, it's not your only source of income. And second thing, when you do invest in that property, make sure you keep those records as accurate as possible every single year for SARS.
And you know what? That's actually the one area I am so terrible at. I'm grateful I have an accountant who keeps me accountable as much as possible, but I am absolutely terrible at that stuff. I think one of the great things, with having smartphones is at least we're able to take pictures of everything that we kind of need, receipts, what have you, and, very quickly, like just quick file it. So create a system. So if you're bad with admin like myself, do those hacks because they work and they're certainly better at managing admin than waiting until when you have to do your returns and you've got your accountant sitting on your neck saying they need X, Y, Z from you. And you now have to kind of remember where you may have put a receipt or whatever the case is. So I think definitely do those hacks. I think it was actually Barbara who had shared that particular hack with us when we had her a couple of months ago. So definitely do implement it. I can vouch for it. It works. And especially for those of us who are not very big on admin. Well, Barbara, we're going to leave it there this evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that is Barbara Mundell, who is the founder of Your Money Life Coach. Well, that's the end of our episode this evening of the Private Property Podcast with myself, Zamadumwa Khumalo. We are going to be back on your screens tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. as we always are. It is a Wednesday, so you can look forward to the First Time Home Buyer Show with AC Clarkson at 8 p.m. Until then, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.
Hi, I'm Clinton Banfield. Our family and I live in Cape Town on the western seaboard. To be able to wake up and take in the scenery every day is an absolute pleasure. We probably have the best views of Table Mountain. There's some really amazing suburbs in our neighborhood. There's Milnerton, which is a central hub close to the city. There's some beautiful homes situated along the canal which give you a breathtaking view of Table Mountain. A little bit further along the canal, you'll find Milnerton Golf Club, which is a great place to unwind with your mates. Then we have Blouberg, which is world-renowned for its beaches, where you'll often see kite surfers taking full advantage of the wind. To top it off, there's a great variety of family restaurants in the area, like Blue Peter, where people love to meet. The Bayside Mall is a landmark in Tableview, giving you an all-round retail experience in a relaxed and convenient environment. As a family, we've chosen to live in Atlantic Beach Golf Estate in Melkbosstrand. Our suburb is so chilled, it really gives you this constant holiday feel. We've lived here for 2 years and we've really enjoyed the laid-back lifestyle, and this is our neighborhood.